How does Don DeLillo build his novels page by page? And today we are going to hear from Don DeLillo himself on his actual writing method, what he does in the trenches. And if you guys don't know, my name is Ian, and here on Right Conscious, we cover everything related to Don DeLillo. If you look at the playlist down below, you will see videos on DeLillo's books, his life, and his writing philosophy. And I plan to do some big breakdowns in the future on Mao 2 and Libra and some other stuff with the release of the JFK files. I think it would be fun to talk about Libra and do some more booktube styled videos. But today we are talking about his writing. And enough for me, let us now hear from Don. And he says, quote, "When I was working on the names, I devised a new method, new to me anyway. When I finished a paragraph, even a 3-line paragraph, I automatically went to a fresh page to start the new paragraph. No crowded pages. This enabled me to see a given set of sentences more clearly. It made rewriting easier and more effective. The white space on the page helped me to concentrate more deeply on what I had written." And there is actually a lot to talk about here. This is actually pretty profound stuff because I know so many people who don't have very much time and they do like automatic writing or like just kind of like blah, 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 blah type of writing, and they actually don't sit down and reflect. And this is something that the screen has forced us to do. This is something that the computer has forced us to do because people are like, I need my computer. I write so much better. The flow of the keyboard. Well, the medium is the message, and the screen, the computer that is connected to the apps and distractions and everything else is, I feel, somewhat problematic because the typewriter is the highest form because it is analog, but you can also type as fast as you need to. And what's crazy about what DeLillo is saying here is that he starts a new page on a typewriter after every single paragraph, which requires him to slow down. It requires him not to just be blazing through his writing because, as I just said, I know so many authors who don't stop, who have full pages, a full novel. If you go look at your novel right now, and it's actually somewhat intimidating. I'm Scrivener right now. If I look at my novel, it's just like, boom. It's just very intimidating. And in that process of first writing and then revising, it's very hard to understand this concept that words build sentences, and most importantly, that sentences build paragraphs. And I don't think that you necessarily need to micro every single sentence. What I mean by that is that if you look at someone like Cormac McCarthy or even Don DeLillo or some of the best authors behind me, they've spent over 5,000 hours of deep work on each one of their works, and they would look at each sentence and revise it multiple times and try to make it really good. And you don't need to do that unless you were trying to be the literary fiction GOAT. And just an FYI, being the literary fiction GOAT doesn't mean that you'll be published or be famous or get any accolades or any pats on the back. That is up to just fate and other circumstances. But if you think that's you, if you're willing to put that time in, that's okay. But you don't have to do that to be a good author or a great author or have people like your stuff or become a full-time author. But you need to micro each paragraph, I would say. Every paragraph should be somewhat good. You shouldn't be sending people through, if one paragraph's bad or not great, that's okay. But if you're stringing together multiple paragraphs or 2 out of every 5 paragraphs suck, then we're going to have a problem and you're going to lose a lot of readers and you're going to lose your reputation as an author and people may never want to read you again. And so focusing instead of on the sentence, rather the paragraph, I think is a very kind of enlightening thing. And DeLillo says at the bottom that the white space on the page helped me concentrate more deeply on what I'd written. And if you know about typography and stuff, I've actually made this change recently with my quotes. That blank space on a page is actually easier to process because if you look at a screen with a bunch of words, even if you're not looking at the word, all the other sentences, your unconscious is actually processing all of that. And it adds an extra weight and pressure to what you are doing. And so I would personally say that something like this is important. And this is what I do a lot of the time with my poetry, or even I haven't been as much into fiction over the last 3 or 4 years. But when I was super into fiction, I would do this too. I would take sentences that were maybe on the computer and rewrite them over and over again on a piece of paper. And then start every single time I made a mistake, even if it was an error of a word, I wouldn't cross it out because I feel like sometimes crossing something out means that it's not valid. I view a word that isn't right as a vehicle to the right word. So I've started to circle them. But in my most OCD times, I've also just started a whole new page anytime there's a mistake or new word and rewrote everything. And through that, I really start to live in that paragraph. I really start to live in that poem or whatever and start to think about it more. And I think that kind of due diligence is something that most people are lacking. And that would really elevate your writing because Don DeLillo is known for his strong paragraphs, for his strong writing. And if you look at someone, another stylist like Nabokov, who was writing on index cards, and there are many other authors like this, they weren't as maximalist. And I'm not saying that you need to do this, you guys. Like, I talk about and I look at the point of view of the person who is speaking, one of these goats. But then you see Walt Whitman. And one of my favorite facts about Walt Whitman is that he didn't do line breaks. His line breaks were when his like journal page ended. And that was just the next line. There was no systematic line breaks in Walt Whitman's work most of the time. So there are people like that just write and go crazy. There's William T. Volman, who just is pounding out work, pounding out prostitutes. What also makes this method interesting is that, I just was talking recently about David Lynch and how Lynch talks about using index cards to build his scenes, like 70 index cards and 70 scenes, and you have a feature film storyboard going. Well, when you have too much writing, when you are lost in the slog, I think many of us can be disconnected from what's actually going on, from the plot and many of the different elements, and looking outside of that, looking at that as kind of separate, these separate ideas that build this eventual story is somewhat smart. And so now I want to speak to you guys. I won't drag this on any longer. I said what I had to say, and now I want to talk to you. What are your methods? What are you doing? How do you show up every single day? Have you ever tried something like this? I've never talked about this very often, but what is your way of composition? Because when I personally, if we're talking about fiction, when I have written a couple drafts of my novel, what I would do is I usually start on paper, but then sometimes I feel like I'm being slowed because there are differing philosophies on the first draft, because I've written a first draft on paper before with a fountain pen, and I found that was a very successful first draft, but it took me a long time. I've also done National Novel Writing Month and gotten 2 first drafts of a novel done with actually my classes, and that felt really fun, really easy, and I really got what I needed to out. And then in further revisions, I really started to add in. But even on those novels that started on the computer, anytime I was having a problem, anytime I felt like I was stuck, I would, as I said earlier, take that to a piece of paper. And I think that that's important, that's what the computer screen doesn't give us, that starting a new page on Google Doc or on Scrivener or whatever doesn't feel the same as changing the paper or starting a new page on the typewriter or crumbling up a paper after a rewrite and starting again. I've also been red pilled and really believe on moving to a more analog style. I have a burner phone with no text, no internet. For 8 months of 2024, I didn't have a phone at all. I'm moving back to cassettes and CDs, trying to get off of all streaming platforms. There's a great new book about Spotify that just came out. But I just did a little bit of research, and Don DeLillo doesn't have a smartphone, still doesn't have a computer, still uses a landline. And I would, once again, just please, I like to hear your responses because I don't know the answers to these questions. And if I get 5 or 6 people responding, it's a good time. How are you different? Cormac McCarthy, Don DeLillo, Thomas Pynchon, all my favorite people back there were 100% analog and have never adopted technology even in their older age, kind of refuse that call. So what makes you different? What makes you think that, adding in this new form is going to make you better? Because we already have the game plan. These guys showed us what we needed to do. We have the new information. We have the new world. All of us have obviously used computers and phones and all that. We can write about it competently. But why wouldn't we use the same tools as before? It's like, I imagine this entire thing, like there was this old tool that people used to make swords. Maybe it was a little bit longer, but the swords were so much better. But then there's a new tool that, to make swords, and they're not as good, but you can do it a little bit faster and it's a little bit more comfortable to make. And that seemingly is what the computer is. Is that a terrible analogy? I don't know. Let me know. Tell me everything that you are doing right now. Let's kind of start a little straw poll, gather a little bit of data out there, and I will see you guys, of course, in the next video. Keep writing, keep moving back to analog practices. You don't have to do it in every aspect of your life. You don't have to switch off the computer, but at least do something. It feels good.